Okay, good evening, good morning, good afternoon to wherever you're watching from and whenever you're watching from. If you're watching a recording, thank you for tuning into our weekly Edgar Poe class series. I have titled this Boris Johnson Heckled, Gaza is being besieged, and Edgar Poe. If you are here for the first time, I usually address those topics in the very beginning, and then we get right into our subject matter, which is Edgar Poe. So if you're just joining us for the first time, thanks for coming in here and being with us. So I'll get right to the title. First of all, we've seen kind of a pretty explosive week. If you are somebody who is a mild Trump supporter, I'm sure you may have been going through some kind of existential crisis where you've been taking your MAGA hat on and off. From dismantling USAID to appointing people like Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel and getting that through, you may have walked away with the impression that, hey, this might actually be a good presidency. And then all of a sudden you get walloped in the face and you thought, well, wait a minute, why is Trump about to annex Gaza and say he's going to own a part of it? Well, that's why we run independent campaigns and we believe in the idea of independence. We don't actually look at things through good or bad lenses, not here. We understand the reality of how people actually think they are thinking and how they think they make decisions. And I knew from day one, I didn't vote for this guy, the current president right now. I knew from day one that he always saw Palestine and Gaza as a real estate project. And that was becoming apparent in the week leading up to his proposal about America owning Gaza, when he said it looks like a demolition site. And I believe today there was just a clip of Donald Trump being quoted as saying, yes, that this is definitely a real estate project. In fact, actually, I think I may be able to pull that up here quickly, just so people know. I mean, it's just a quick kind of how do you call it? Here we go. Yes, there we go. I will just play it here. So share screen. Let's tab audio.
Table for a takeover. No deliberations. It's been very well received, where basically the United States would view it as a real estate transaction, where we'll be an investor in that part of the world, and no rush to do anything. We wouldn't need anybody there. It would be supplied and given to us by Israel. They'll watch it in terms of security. We're not talking about boots in the ground or anything, but I think the fact that we're there, that we have an investment there, I think would go a long way to creating peace. We don't want to see everybody move back and then move out in 10 years. This has been going on for 50 years, much more than that. We just want to see stability. That would be having us have that particular piece in that particular location. I think would show great stability and would lead to great stability in the area for very little money, very little price.
So I play that because that is the current proposal right now. I mean, when it was first announced, it was assumed that there would be boots on the ground. And then Donald Trump put out a statement 2 days later saying, no, this would not mean boots on the ground. This just means that after negotiations are done between Israel and Gaza, it would be handed off to the United States. But the people who are being left out of the equation are the people who currently inhabit the land, who have generations of people that go back there. And the other inhuman thing about what Trump is saying is that he sees it as an investment. Housing in itself is not inhuman, but when you only look at it from the perspective of real estate and investment, it becomes inhuman. Now, if you've been following some of my other media appearances, you might have seen I was on a show with Matthew Ho and Ryan Milton and Jeff Norman on the Whiners yesterday, where we discussed exactly Trump's plan for Gaza. And I had proposed to him an alternative there called the Oasis Plan, which is a Schiller Institute-backed plan that has received a lot of endorsements, including from the Palestinian ambassador to Denmark, who has endorsed the Oasis Plan, where the idea is you don't just look at it as the one nation there, but you look at the entire region, because other countries have now become a part of the same problem. You have Syria, you have Lebanon, you have Gaza and the West Bank, of course, and you also have Jordan. All of these countries require real human development. Earlier today, I posed a question on the International Peace Coalition, asking how quickly can you actually repair a place like Gaza? How quickly can you actually repair a place like Palestine? And we know of technology now where the Chinese are able to build housing in just 28 hours, or the Russians in Mariupol, after it was completely devastated, in just a number of months, were able to completely rebuild Mariupol, where it is now not just habitable, but people can live there comfortably again. So the means to get these things built and to get people proper habitation is there. And if it was a real emergency development effort, the people of Gaza could have housing in as little as 3 to 4 days temporarily, while more permanent, stable housing is built in months and years, to where Gaza and the West Bank and Palestine as a whole can have its own say and real sovereignty again. And it can have its right to self-determination again. And the beauty about this plan is that it's not just any one nation responsible or involved in what will be developed. It has to be an international development. One of the things that Matthew Ho said when I had showed him the Oasis Plan map, which I wish I had the graphic pulled up, he said it's missing airports. And just the very fact that he was thinking that, and he said, yeah, I like it's just, it needs airports. Was like, yeah, well, these are the kinds of ideas that will be thought about and proposed as people actually start thinking about what the region needs and requires. And people should not be limited to what they think is or isn't possible, but should be creative and use their imaginations as to what would you want in a modern city that needs to be rebuilt. What should it look like 6 months from now, a year from now, and 10 years from now? And how does that define what it will look like now? Now, one thing I want to address too in the title before I pass things off to Dennis Speed, and some of the people in the room should look at their text messages. One thing I want to address before I pass things off to Dennis Speed is I put in the title that Boris Johnson was heckled, and that's exactly right. One of our dear friends of the campaign down south, Morgan Blythe, confronted Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who was in North Carolina for some reason. That reason is unknown. We know, Larry Johnson was asked the question, why would Boris Johnson actually be in town? And Boris Johnson was also baffled, and he made note of the fact that when Tucker Carlson wanted to interview Boris Johnson, he said he'll do it for $1 million. Now, obviously, Boris Johnson is here to do something. What that something is, we don't really necessarily know, but we know it can't be good. As people may remember, Boris Johnson was involved in sabotaging the peace talks that could have happened in April of 2022 between Ukraine and Russia. And instead, he allowed it. He convinced Zelensky not to take the peace deal on the table, thus leading to the over 500,000 casualties that have resulted of this war, the majority of them being Ukrainian, and now a lot of young and old Ukrainians who have been drafted to this war. And I wanted to play this intervention of Morgan Blythe confronting the court jester himself, Boris Johnson. And so here we go. Make that full screen.
Mr. Boris, I have a question. How many lives do you think you could have saved in Ukraine if you hadn't stopped peace talks? The reports are 300,000. 300,000, and it's likely to be much more. Do you support President Trump or Daniel Lammy, who is there right now, halting peace talks like you were? How are we supposed to believe you that Putin is this imperialistic maniac when we're watching our so-called ally bomb foreign nations, demolish Gaza,
Okay, well, I'm not sure what happened there. There was a technical glitch there, but there was just about another 10 seconds, of course, where she gets taken away, or as she put it, ushered out. Um, I just want to make one more call for people to be doing this all over the country. I was looking for Boris Johnson in the news to see if it was written about the fact that he was here in the United States, or if he was doing some kind of tour where he would be speaking next. But because she just happened to be down south and receives the emails of all the local universities in her area, she got the notice that a former world leader was going to be in her hometown. Now, that's pretty crazy. I can imagine that there are similar things happening all over the country wherever you are. It just requires people to do a little digging and looking into it. And I think that if we had 50 to 100 of these kinds of interventions happening a day, but more generously a week, I think we could shift and change a lot of things in the country where more people would be unafraid to speak out for the truth. And so, with that being said, that is my introduction for this week's class, and I am now going to pass things off to Dennis Speed. Dennis, are you there?
Yeah, hi. You able to hear me?
Yep.
Okay, well, we'll get right into this. We're going to thank everybody for being with us this week. We've already referenced, obviously, through the intervention, the nature of the reason that we're doing the class. We talk about Edgar Poe. For those who are on and have never been on, you notice we don't use the name Edgar Allan Poe. The reason being that the author, Edgar Poe, is misnamed in history. That wasn't the name that he used, and that is important to know. So the reasons that the first question is, why would somebody do that? Why would his name be different than is otherwise identified? And in that question lies the character of your own life, especially today, especially with the things that we are presently confronted with. There's one sort of, people use the term narrative. We could use the term lie, because most narratives are lies. They're plausibles. They aren't really what's happening. They simply are what people decide to say is happening, or wish to be overheard saying they believe is happening. And the way to understand many things, most things in American politics, is that it's only in the act of uncovering the lies about American politics or any other politics that the truth begins to pop up from behind the scenes on anything. For example, the truth of the 2 assassination attempts against the present president of the United States, which is important to locate or embed within successful assassinations of earlier presidents or presidential candidates. That is something that exists as a fact, independent of anybody's evaluation about somebody like a Donald Trump. But the reason that I state that is that there are also other forms of facts. They're not about events, but they're about realities of the mind. Poe was a writer born in 1809 who died in 1849, spent the last years of his life in the Bronx, very close by where the office is, where people are presently sitting, and operated as part of a group of Americans that were operating as a formal, actual intelligence service called the Society of Cincinnatus. It's important to understand that that's the case because it's not an isolated fact. The originators of the United States, what are called the founders, were part of a conspiracy to create the United States. Some people have tried to point out that the fact that they were part of that conspiracy shows that they were evil, but actually nothing has happened in history which is not the product of a conspiracy. Let me repeat that. It's not a matter of having a theory about conspiracies. Nothing has happened in history which is not the product of conspiracy, unless you get the intersection of conspiracies, which, as they try to play themselves out, create effects that none of those conspiracies intend. It's like the effect, as the fighter Mike Tyson once said, everybody's got a plan, in other words, a conspiracy, until they get punched in the face. And then what happens is that those plans must be altered by the reality of what is actually happening in the moment. And therefore, you can't say, nor is it true that the fact that people are part of some conspiratorial organization or other means that that's how history is made. History is not made in that sense by conspiracies, because history is the intersection of all these various forces that are attempting to shape it. And as a consequence, usually something completely different than anybody is planning happens. But to presume that these things are unplanned or that these things are happening merely by accident is truly, truly foolish. We have read several stories by Edgar Poe, and we've tried to let the stories sort of speak for themselves about elements of his discovery, Edgar Poe's discovery of, if you will, the character of the mind and how the mind creates through imagination a way of looking at the world that allows you to see things. And even in the stories themselves, as we've tried to emphasize, the plot lines of these stories are actually not very important at all. It's what's said in between the words that is important. Often it's literally not the words on the printed page that are important. It's what's in between the words. The ideas don't exist in the words. The ideas exist above the words. The ideas are conveyed through words, but the ideas are wordless, just like in your own mind. The ability to think this way, which is something which was characteristic of several of the people that were part of that Society of Cincinnatus, whether that was Alexander Hamilton or the Marquis de Lafayette or George Washington, or later on Edgar Poe, John Quincy Adams, and others. The ability to think that way is something that is essential to investigate, because it wasn't esoteric. It came out of the productive, largely first farmer and then ultimately manufacturing character of the American population, a population whose institutions were marred by slavery and other injustices, but whose trajectory as a society was always toward progress. And what's important about that is that, as in this time, the ability to understand or to select how to move ahead and move ideas ahead, the exercise of thinking about how you think as opposed to what you think, and that the idea is to not try to change what people think, which you will never do, but to change how people think and therefore what they think. Now that is a valuable investigation. Tonight, what we're going to do is a story, The Cask of Amontillado. We're doing this story because in the last several weeks, we've been discussing this story, The Assignation, The Rendezvous, which is also called The Visionary. And we have discussed or alluded to the personage of a British or English poet, Lord Byron, as a reference point for that story, that the story is not about Byron, but the story does reference him. But the story is set in Venice. And we want to, and we've talked a little bit about Venice, but there's also a Venetian outlook. This was the subject of writing that was done by many Americans, well, several Americans, I shouldn't say many. One of the most notable was a man by the name of James Fenimore Cooper, Cooper was one of the key figures in the Society of the Cincinnatus, and he and Samuel Morse and several others during the 1830s were in Paris, met with the Marquis de Lafayette, tried to help to make a revolution in Paris during 1831 and 32. That revolution did fail. There is an assertion by some that Edgar Poe was in France. We aren't going to talk about that assertion, but the story we're going to read tonight, which is the Cask of Amontillado, occurs much later, or is written much later than 1832. During that period, James Fenimore Cooper, the writer, the American writer, who was in Paris, wrote several books, but one of the books he wrote is called The Bravo, which means the assassin. The word bravo and assassin are essentially interchangeable. And what I would like to do is have Lynn Speed talk to us a little bit about Fenimore Cooper, The Bravo, and Venice. So, Lynn, if you're there.
She's coming.
Okay. So just a few things about Venice, and this is a wonderful book, The Bravo. Venice, of course, is sometimes referred to as the city of 1,000 islands, which is literally what it is. It's actually built with sort of pillars, which are atop. Well, I won't go through the whole construction, but literally, it's the oligarchy that was escaping from Rome that fled north and fled into the swamps with their money and riches and so on. And the old families of Venice, which is approximately 300 families, formed the city. They built it up on these mud packs. And it was the center in many respects of commerce and trade for all of Europe, but extending into Africa, extending into the East, extending, of course, throughout Europe. And it ran as a complete oligarchy, but in the name of a, quote, republic. They claimed that they could take the name republic because they did not have one ruler, which is like whose title has been given by God or Providence, but that it was a they had many rulers, and in fact, in that way, they had many, but they had none. So you had a lineage of 300 families. And people would literally, if you had a young man, the oldest in the family, gets to be a certain age, then they automatically become a senator. At some point, they decided that even 300 was too unwieldy to actually govern. So they reduced this to a council of 10. But the council of 10 also was not adequate. So they reduced this to they still had everything else, but the actual ruling power in the city was a council of 3. Now, one thing to know about Venice is that nothing is what it appears to be. And the principle of ruling is through subterfuge and mystery. So, for example, the idea of wearing a mask is a sacred privilege that cannot be ever challenged except under the most extreme circumstances. And when I say a mask, I'm not just talking about, a little mask. You may have seen some pictures, but actually a mask that literally covers the eyes, covers the nose, covers the mouth. And that's sort of the moderate costume. So if you went out in Venice, and this story takes place in the Bravo in the 1800s, so 18th century rather, 1700s, it would be typical that if you're out on an evening you could have as many as 50% of the population is mass. People don't know who they are, except perhaps by their gait or if they recognize something of their outfit. But then there's even a further outfit that people would have if they really want to be disguised. And many people had this outfit. For example, the population that was buying and selling things. You remember in Shylock in Venice, who's the merchant, who is actually, he's not the merchant of Venice, but he also is, but he's a usurer. He's a person that is getting money from the young nobles, cavaliers, and other people with money at enormous rates of usury. Well, sometimes these individuals would be dressed in what you would call a domino, and that is literally a head to foot outfit, which is large and flowing. So there is nothing showing except like two little eyes, or maybe your nose and mouth, which is why it's called a domino, because it just looks like little dots there. And everything else is this big flowing robe. So everything is deceit and deception. And Cooper is writing this. He's writing it in 1831. So this is being written about. He's contemporary with Poe. He's a little bit older than Poe. But Cooper and Poe are, as part of the Cincinnati Society that Dennis just touched on. Remember that the Republic is still very young. George Washington is inaugurated in 1789. This is in the 1830s. So you've only had 40 years. And in fact, from the time of the War of 1812, which is sort of a second attempt by the British to defeat the America, to destroy the Republic, to take it back over, you've only had 20 years. So you've had one generation. And Poe, Cooper, and then later, slightly later, almost actually really at the same time, Lincoln talks about this. They're very, very concerned that people don't understand the nature of what they have in America. They don't understand the nature of a true republic, and they're looking to Europe. They're looking to sort of the glimmer, the glamour, et cetera, and saying, well, maybe this would work. Maybe we don't have something that we have to guard and protect. So the principles of the Republic, Cooper is very concerned to present to people by showing to them the opposite of that. And Venice is really, it's the quintessential oligarchy. And he's going after England in this, but he's doing it through Venice because the particular organization of the society there makes the evil and the mystery far more. It makes it very, very, very clear. I'll just read you. And the other thing I think is very important is no one is truly free. In other words, the interest of the state is paramount over everyone. It's also a very good illustration of what's called a fondy, which Lyndon LaRouche often talked about, which is this idea that it's not the individual members of the families, even the rich families, but it's the entity which actually governs everything. So while you have this oligarchy, they themselves are not even free. For example, if you have a young woman who is the daughter of a noble family, and she's very wealthy, well, she's not free to choose who she's going to get married to, who her spouse will be. She's not even free to choose her associates. That's completely governed and determined by the so-called city fathers. Similarly, the young men, while they would have more freedom, would not be free to do anything except as it's actually prescribed by the so-called state. And this even extends up to the Council of Three. Cooper describes the Council of Three met in secret, ordinarily issued its decrees without communicating with any other body, and had them enforced with the fearfulness and mystery and a suddenness of execution that resembled the blows of fate. Oh, I should add that no one knows, even among the Council of 10 or the Council of 300, who the Council of Three is. They're chosen in secret. And when they meet mass, though they themselves know among each other. The Council of Three knows each other. And then you have the Doge, who is the sort of titular authority over this whole thing. The Doge himself was not superior to its authority, to this Council of Three, nor protected from its decisions, while it has been known that one of the privileged three has been denounced by one of his companions. So it's a complete control by this state apparatus. And in reading this, kept coming to mind the British saying, we have no permanent friends, we have no permanent enemies. All we have is our own interest. Well, whose interest is it? It's actually something which is completely inhuman. And that's what happens in the course of this. You see the actual people going from having sort of a glimmer of humanity to having nothing but this kind of cold exterior. The story opens with a poem by Byron, and he says it's taking place at the River of Sighs. So you have Venice, you have the Grand Canal, which is this huge canal that runs through it, which is so wide that it only has one bridge across it, which is called the Rialto. And that's famous in Shakespeare, you know, what goes on the Rialto, what news on the Rialto is one of the opening lines from The Merchant of Venice. But then you have a series of small canals. So the streets are not streets, they're canals. They're little rivers, but they're not really rivers. They're actually part of the seawater that's running through this entire area. And then you'll have a little landmass. So you also have hundreds of bridges, the most famous of which, beside the Rialto, is called the Bridge of Sighs. And the Bridge of Sighs goes on the one side, it connects the main island of it's up there. So on the left-hand side is on the right-hand side is the prison, the state prison. And on the left-hand side is the palace of the Doge. And that canal is called Rio Palacio. So it's literally the canal of the palace. And that little overhead bridge is what, there you can see it clearer. That little overhead bridge is what connects it. Now, the reason they're connected is so that if you have a prisoner, they can actually be brought through the bridge, which is enclosed, as you see there, and they can be brought directly into this little chamber where this Council of Three, which is delivering a summary judgment on whoever the person is, and they deliberate on many things in terms of the future of Venice. But as they say, the judgment is quick and summary, and many times ends with the execution or otherwise horrid punishment, including life imprisonment in this prison. There's another aspect of the prison which is described, which is that you see part of it is low down, it's close to the water, and there's even parts of it which may be sort of below the water. So it's very damp and cold there. So what they do is they have winter quarters and summer quarters to give you a sense of the character of these people. The winter quarters are down below where it's particularly cold and damp. So that's where they put people. So they freeze to death in the winter. And then the upper level has the sun beaming through. And even in May and June, it's extremely hot. It's like an oven. So that's the summer quarters. And that's how they regulate the prisoners. There's other things. How is this kept and maintained? And I think this is the last thing I'll say. So you have this scene largely in the evening, which is there even to this day. Dennis, my husband, and I was in Venice about 6 years ago, and you have the square of St. Mark, and this is how Cooper describes it, which is very accurate. Hundreds of pedestrians were pouring out into the narrow streets of Venice, into the square of St. Mark, like water. Maybe you can find that, Jose. Like water gushing through the straight aqueduct into a broad and bubbling basin. Gallant cavalieri and grave cittadini, soldiers of the Dalmatia. Dalmatia is like the secret police. There's a lot of them. And seamen of the galleys. These are people that are basically commissioned into service, including very young people, 12, 13 years old, that are just put on these boats, and they're part of Venice's fleet for their conquering of other territories. Dames of the city, females of lighter manners, jewelers of the Rialto, and the traders from the Levant, Jew, Turk, and Christian, traveler, adventurer, podesta, valet, avocado, and gondolier, held their way alike in the common center of amusement. The harried and air and careless eye, the measured step and jealous glance, the jest and laugh, the song of caprice, the melody of the flute, the grimace of the buffoon, the tragic frown of the improvisori, the pyramid of the grotesque, the compelled and melancholy smile of the harpists, cries of the water sellers, cowls of the monks, plumage of warriors, hum of voices, and the universal movement and bustle added more to the permanent objects of the place, rendered the scene the most remarkable of Christendom. So that's what the city square looks like from about 5 to midnight. The other aspect of the city is that since there are no streets, there's only the gondoliers in the water, is that when people are not out, there's an eerie silence. You don't hear anything. So if you actually go away from the canal into the, let's say, inside of the city, which may only be a few blocks, you hear absolutely nothing. And the way even the gondoliers glide on the water at night, you can't hear anything. So it makes for a very, very spooky, mysterious, and an atmosphere where evil can prosper. So I think that's all I want to say, just to give you a quick sense of it.
Let's do the two poems. So they're actually the same poem, but there's a first draft. It was written by Poe and published when he was, I believe, 21. And that is The Doomed City. Kynan, I think you've got this prepared, right? You're going to read that or recite?
Yeah. Okay. So this is The Doomed City. Lo, Death hath reared himself a throne in a strange city, all alone, far down within the dim west. All the good, all the bad, all the worst and the best have gone to their eternal rest. Their shrines and palaces and towers are not like anything of ours. Oh no, oh no, ours never loomed to heaven with that ungodly gloom. Time-eaten towers that tremble not, around by lifting winds forgot, resignedly beneath the sky the melancholy waters lie. A heaven that God doth not contemn with stars is like a diadem. We liken Our Lady's eyes to them. But there, that everlasting pall, it would be mockery to call such dreariness a heaven at all. Yet though no holy rays come down on the long night time of that town, light from the lurid deep sea streams up the turrets silently, up thrones, up long forgotten bowers of sculptured ivy and stone flowers, up domes, up spires, up kingly halls, up fanes, up Babylon-like walls, up many a melancholy shrine whose entablatures intertwine. The mask, the vial, and the vine. There open temples, open graves are on a level with the waves. But not the riches there that lie in each idol's diamond eye. Not the gaily jeweled dead tempt the waters from their bed. For no ripples curl, alas, along that wilderness of glass. No swellings hint that winds may be upon a far-off happier sea. So blend the turrets and shadows there that all seem pendulous in air, while from the high towers of the town death looks gigantically down. But lo, a stir is in the air. The wave, there is a ripple there, as if the towers had thrown aside and slightly sinking the dull tide, as if the turret tops had given a vacuum in the filmy heaven. The waves have now a redder glow. The very hours are breathing low. And when, amid no earthly moans, down that town shall settle hence, hell rising from 1,000 thrones shall do it reverence, and death to some more happy clime shall give his undivided time.
Now, the commentary that's made about these poems illustrates why we are doing this class. And can I have the next reader who's going to do the revised version of this poem? This is a note that pertains to this, which says, in reading this poem, the modern mind tends immediately to think of Atlantis, the fabled paradise that has long usurped any recollection of other submerged cities. As has often been suggested, the more likely source for Poe was the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, both still visible beneath the Dead Sea. And then it continues along that line, but they never mention Venice. So we will now hear the city which is a city in the sea. Let's hear now the same, if you will, revised version of this poem.
The city in the sea. Lo, death has reared himself a throne in a strange city lying alone, far down within the dim west, where the good and the bad and the worst and the best have gone to their eternal rest. There shrines and palaces and towers, time-eaten towers that tremble not, resemble nothing that is ours. Around by lifting winds forgot, resignedly beneath the sky, the melancholy waters lie. No rays from the holy heaven come down on the long nighttime of that town, but light from out the lurid sea streams up the turrets silently, gleams up the pinnacles far and free, up domes, up spires, up kingly halls, up fames, up Babylon like walls, up shadowy, long forgotten bowers of sculptured ivy and stone flowers, up many and many a marvelous shrine whose friezes intertwine the violet, and the vine. Resignedly beneath the sky, the melancholy waters lie. So blend the turrets and the shadows there, that all seem pendulous in air. While from a proud tower in the town, death looks gigantically down. There open fanes and gaping graves, yon level with the luminous waves, but not the riches there that lie in each idol's diamond eye. Not the gaily jeweled dead tempt the waters from their bed, for no ripples curl, alas, along the wilderness of glass. No swellings tell that winds may be upon some far off happier sea. No heavings hint that winds have been on seas less hideously serene. But lo, a stir is in the air, the wave. There is movement there, as if the towers were thrown aside, in slightly sinking the dull tide, as if their tops had feebly given a void within the filmy heaven. The waves had now a redder glow. The hours are breathing faint and low. And when amid no earthly moans, down, down, the town shall settle hence. Hell, rising from 1,000 thrones, shall do it reverence.
What we're going to do is go to the story, the Cask of Amontillado. Now, the Cask of Amontillado is not necessarily set in Venice. One could argue persuasively that it could be set in Spain, for example. But what is important about this story in terms of our reading, what we're doing with the stories, is that this is the spirit of Venice. The spirit of Venice is the character of and importance of this story. In what we're going to do here, you'll always see somebody there at the desk. I will begin the narration, and there will be one additional voice. It'll become obvious what we're doing, I think, rather quickly. So this is the Cask of Amontillado, written by Edgar Poe, published in approximately 1846. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insults, I vowed revenge. You who so well know the nature of my soul will not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to a threat. At length, I would be avenged. This was a point definitively settled, but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face. And he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although in other regards he was a man to be respected and even feared. He prided himself upon his connoisseurship in wine. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part, their enthusiasm is adopted to suit the time and opportunity, to practice imposture upon the British and Australian millionaires. In painting and gemmery, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack. But in the matter of old wines, he was sincere. In this respect, I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself and bought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk one evening, during the supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. He had on a tight-fitting, party-striped dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. I said to him,
"My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you are looking today. But I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts."
How?
said he.
Amontillado? A pipe? Impossible. And in the middle of the carnival.
"I have my doubts,
I replied.
and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain.
Amontillado?
I have my doubts,
Amontillado?
but I must satisfy you.
Amontillado?
As you are engaged, I am on my way to Lucrezi. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me,
Cressy cannot tell Amontillado from sherry.
and yet some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your own.
Come, let us go.
Whither?
To your vaults.
My friend, no. I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement. Lucrezi,
I have no engagement. Come.
my friend, no. It is not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp. They are encrusted with nitre.
Let us go, nevertheless. The cold is merely nothing, Amontillado. You have been imposed upon. And as for Lucrezi, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado.
Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm and, putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelaire closely about my person, I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in honor of the time. I had told them that I should not return until the morning and had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned. I took from their sconces 2 flambeaux, and giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent and stood together upon the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode.
The pipe?
Said he.
It is farther on,
Said I.
but observe the white webwork which gleams from these cavern walls.
He turned towards me and looked into my eyes with 2 filmy orbs that distilled the rheum of intoxication.
Nitre?
He asked at length.
Nitre.
I replied.
How long have you had that cough?
My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes.
It is nothing.
He said at last.
Come,
I said with decision.
we will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy, as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me, it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucrece.
Enough.
He said.
The cough is a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough.
True, true.
I replied.
And indeed, I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily. But you should use all proper caution. A draught of this Medoc will defend us from the damps.
Here
Sorry.
Here I knocked off the neck of a bottle, which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mold.
Drink,
I said, presenting him the wine. He raised it to his lips with a leer. He paused and nodded to me familiarly while his bells jingled.
I drink
He said,
to the buried that repose around us.
and I to your long life.
He again took my arm and we proceeded.
These vaults
He said.
are extensive.
The Montresors
I replied.
were a great and numerous family.
Forget your arms.
A huge human foot door in a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel.
And the motto?
Nemo me impune lacessit.
Good.
He said. The wine sparkled in his eyes, and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the Medoc. We had passed through long walls of piled skeletons with casks and puncheons intermingling into the inmost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by an arm above the elbow.
The nitre,
I said.
see, it increases. It hangs like moss upon the vaults. We are below the river's bed. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come, we will go back ere it is too late. Your cough.
It is nothing.
He said.
Let us go on. But first, another draught of the Medoc.
I broke and reached him a flagon of de Grave. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one.
You do not comprehend?
He said.
Not I.
I replied.
Then you are not of the Brotherhood.
How?
You are not of the Masons.
Yes, yes. Yes, yes.
I said.
Oh, yes, yes.
No, sorry.
Oh,
Next line.
oh, you. Impossible. A Mason?
A Mason.
I replied.
A sign.
He said.
A sign.
It is this.
I answered, producing from beneath the folds of my roquelaire a trowel.
You jest.
He exclaimed, recoiling a few paces.
But let us proceed to the Amontillado.
Be it so. Oh, sorry.
Be it so.
I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak and again offering him my arm. Jose, I'm going to put you in here in a minute. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. Just so people are clear, what he did was he took out a trowel, like when you are putting bricks, you're putting cement on bricks, you take, you have a trowel and it's used to put the paint. That's what he's saying. So he's saying he's part of the Masons because he's got a trowel.
Oh,
Mm.
that's like
Yeah. So he's putting, they're for putting bricks together. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, descended, passed on, and descending again, arrived at a deep crypt in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeau rather to glow than flame. The flambeau means it's like a group of candles. So they've grabbed the, so it kind of has 5, 6 candles on it, and you're carrying it. That's what they're doing. And he's saying that there's so little oxygen that the flames are just glowing because there's no oxygen down there. Jose, pick it up there.
Sure. At the most remote end of the crypt, there appeared another less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains piled to the vault overhead in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. 3 sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this manner. From the 4th side, the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall, thus exposed by the displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior crypt or recess in depth about 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no special use within itself, but formed merely the interval between 2 of the colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs, and was backed by one of their circumscribing walls of solid granite. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavored to pry into the depths of the recess. Its termination, the feeble light did not enable us to see.
Proceed,
I said.
Herein is the Amontillado. As for Lucrezi,
He is an ignoramus.
Interrupted my friend, as he stepped unsteadily forward, while I followed immediately at his heels. In an instant he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more, and I had fettered him to the granite. In its surface were 2 iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet, horizontally. From one of these depended a short chain, from the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too much astounded to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess.
pass your hand,
I said.
over the wall. You cannot help feeling the nitre. Indeed, it is very damp. Once more, let me implore you to return. No? Then I must positively leave you. But I must first render you all the little attentions in my power.
The Amontillado!
Ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment.
True,
I replied.
the Amontillado.
As I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones of which I have before spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. I had scarcely laid the first tier of my masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low moaning cry from the depth of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. There was then a long and obstinate silence. I laid the second tier, and the third, and the fourth, and then I heard the furious vibration of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with the more satisfaction, I ceased my labors and sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel and finished without interruption the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh tier. The wall was now nearly upon a level with my breast. I again paused, and holding the flambeau over the mason work, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. A succession of loud and shrill screams, bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form, seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated. I trembled, unsheathing my rapier. I began to grope with it about the recess, but the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfied. I reproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and in strength. I did this, and the clamorer grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its destined position. But now there came from out the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing as that of the noble Fortunato. The voice said,
A very good joke indeed. An excellent jest. We will have many a rich laugh about it at the palazzo. Over our wine.
The Amontillado.
I said.
Yes, the Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will not they be awake?
What happened?
Oh, can you hear us, Dennis?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, I don't know what happened.
Okay, well, we got like one line left, so.
Yeah, I think where did you stop hearing us?
Well, could everybody else hear you?
Well, in the
Everybody-
class, yeah, but I think it was because we got a note in from one of the listeners saying the audio just stopped.
Okay, so let's go back because that was a bad time to lose you guys.
Where did the audio cut out?
Okay, here's what I can tell you exactly. But Kynan was in the middle. He said, "But is it not getting late? Will that be waiting us?" And that's in that line. That's where it cut out.
Okay.
So you
Okay.
got to do the we got the laughs, but you can sort of pick it up from there. You got to do it right. You got to give them. that was worst part. Great. Yeah. Have
Okay.
time to pick it up.
Okay.
All right.
Yes, the Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will not they be awaiting us at the palazzo, the Lady Fortunato and the rest? Let us be gone.
Yes,
I said.
let us be gone.
For the love of God, Montrezor.
Yes,
I said.
for the love of God.
But to these words, I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud.
Fortunato,
No answer. I called again.
Fortunato.
No answer still. I thrust a torch to the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in return only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick. It was the dampness of the catacombs that made it so. I hastened to make an end of my labor. I forced the last stone into its position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry, I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace requiescat.
In pace requiescat. May he rest in peace.
Yeah, that was Scary, someone said in the room.
Well, that's the spirit of Venice.
Yeah, well, okay, so why? But you said this doesn't explicitly take place in Venice.
Well, it says because he's complaining about the Italians, right?
Ah,
And he wouldn't have complained about the Italians that way, right? But on the other, because the Venetians would talk about the Florentines or the Romans, see, or the Sienese, because the Venetians didn't believe there was no Italy for the Venetians until the 1860s. There was no Italy for most of the cities because they were dominated by city states. So that's just what I was referencing there.
okay.
All right. So
What is the family motto that was in
I
Latin?
no one treats me with impunity. No one challenges me with impunity.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I think that it's not a bad idea to reread this, but I think it's a very explicit story. There's not a lot to interpret here. It's very lean, and it's very very direct. But what do people think about it? Anything in particular? Sure.
I just had a question. Do we ever know what wrong Fortunato committed?
No.
No, we don't.
No. We don't even know that it was substantial.
Right.
Right? We are never required or consulted as judges upon the injustice.
But there is the detail that we're told there's 1,000 injuries, but the thing that makes the narrator decide to do this act is an insult.
Right.
Right.
Adding insult to injury.
Right.
Oh, I guess that goes to the family motto: "No one shall impugn me."
Yeah. Challenge me with impunity. Without punishment. That's what impunity is. No punishment. That's the notion. And you can see there, I must not only punish, but punish with impunity.
It's also the national motto of Scotland. I don't know if that means anything to the story.
All these things mean things to Poe.
How much of the story can we really trust after he actually goes into the caves? Because he has the flambeau and the oxygen is getting light, or the oxygen is getting drowned out by the fire, and everything's kind of foggy and in a haze.
What do you mean trust?
Well, I mean, like, how much of this is actually happening versus it being like in his head?
It's not in his head.
Okay.
This is vendetta.
What the narrator says right after the line you just read, Dennis? He says, "A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser."
Mm-hmm.
So that, to me, that seems like there's a concept of like nemesis, right? That something coming. If I understand the words of the sentence, he is saying, you haven't redressed your grievance if retribution overtakes you.
Right. You can't. You're
Last
the middle of the
paragraph.
Yeah, the middle of the
your vendetta is incomplete if you get caught.
That's what retribution overtakes the redresser means to you? If you get caught?
Sure, because the point of the thing is that's retribution. See, as opposed to making some value judgment here, because you don't know what happened. We don't know whether or not Fortunato told a good joke. That may be what he did.
Right.
And this guy is insulted. We just know that we're getting a story from an old man who is sitting and speaking to us. He could be in a confessional. He could be at a late banquet speaking to someone who is obviously thought to, as he said, you who so well know the nature of my soul. So somebody that he trusts. If you think about the assignation, suppose this story had been told to the narrator in the assignation when he arrived at the room. I mean, this could have happened, right?
Hmm.
So what's happening, and again, this is the Venetian idea. To be specific, let's go back to what Lynn said about the Council of Three. The Council of Three is the soul of crime because they are making the decisions, but no one knows who they are, but all three of them know who they are. But the reason that there's three of them is that so that way, any two of them, at the point that one of them tries to break the code, can eliminate that person. Or any two of them can be eliminated by someone else who decides that they've broken the code. And no one else knows who they are. So what does that mean about justice in Venice?
Justice is blind.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's truly blind to all who don't, because nobody knows who's doing it.
Try to conceive for a minute about Lynn made some references before about how Venice was conducted. I mean, it existed for hundreds of years. I think let's just see if anybody else has anything else. But I think the story itself is just a straightforward. I am telling you now, 50 years later, because I know that nobody has ever known this story. And effectively, for whatever reason, this individual believes he is now beyond any form of retribution.
He does. I'm just wondering because at the end, when he's, I guess, leaving the catacomb, he says, "My heart grew sick on account of the dampness of the catacombs." I'm not exactly sure what he means by that or why his heart grew sick. Is that his conscience weighing on him? I'm not sure.
No, let me do this for you. Let's take it from, okay, listen to it this way. Yes, the Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will not they be awaiting us at the Palazzo, the Lady Fortunato in the west? Let us be gone. Yes, I said. Let us be gone. For the love of God, Montressor. Yes, I said, for the love of God. But to these words, I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, Fortunato! No answer. I called again, Fortunato! No answer still. I thrust the torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in return only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick. It was the dampness of the catacombs that made it so. I hastened to make a end of my labor. I forced the last stone into its position. I plastered it up against the new masonry. I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace requiescat. Does that sound to you
No, it doesn't. No, it does
Okay,
not.
all right. So now, perhaps there's a different way to read it, but that's the way I read it when I read it in 1963.
Well, yeah, I mean, he says in the beginning that he's smiling at the thought of his immolation. So it's he's obviously a psychopath.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, this guy has made a decision, and it's made now. But remember, it's made in the name of his family. It's not his, right? It's in the name of the family.
That's what the coat of arms is, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. A human foot d'or, a foot of gold, in a blue field. The foot crushes a serpent rampant, whose fangs are embedded in the heel. The motto, Nemo me impune lecessit. No one challenges me with impunity. Good, he said. That is, Fortunato says, good.
But I hate to be that guy, but I'll do it anyway. He was given a lot of opportunities to walk out of there.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Montresor is like, oh no, you know what? It's too damp and you're coughing a lot.
Yeah.
And Fortunato's like, nonsense. Let's keep going.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes to the question about justice, right? Because he's entrapped, right?
Well, by the allure of the wine.
Well, he's a drunk.
Yes.
So he gets him drunk, and then by the time he's actually ready to kill him and he's in the trap, he just walks up against the wall and he doesn't know where he is. Right. But like in this world of humans' flaws is just like the means by which you kill them. Right.
It's only until he realizes what's happening to him that he actually
that it's too late.
He sobers up though.
Yeah.
He sobers up.
That's how they got Bill Clinton.
I mean, it's just ridiculous on its face that you would say, yeah, I got this new shipment of wine and I went to put it deep under a riverbed in the deepest, darkest cavern.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just like,
Right.
Yeah,
so the story's just an absurdity then, or what's the
Amontillado?
no, that the fact that he fell for this is just like, even if you're drunk, you'd be like, I feel like you'd be like, why did you put this cast down here?
Amontillado.
Yeah.
Because of Amontillado.
Amontillado.
Right.
And
I
also
mean, yeah,
because
that is the whole. They keep saying it.
Amontillado.
Yeah, like this is true.
he's saying that he could get the opinion from Lucrezi, so he's really upset about that because Lucrezi is a fool, according to Fortunato, right? And remember, he is a wine connoisseur. That's not made up.
Yeah.
Right. He says that right in the beginning,
Yeah.
and he thinks, and this guy, the one who's carrying out the vendetta, is a wine connoisseur, so he knows exactly. There actually is a whole thing in the Bravo where this idea of the very, very best wines that are also smuggled in. One of the things that the council allows is people who are known to them to smuggle in wines, even though that's like a violation. But certain things that are violations are permitted.
Like the Bronfmans.
And yeah, right, exactly. And that's one of them.
Oh, I was just gonna ask, does anyone else here have a question or
Yeah, I
thought
have a
about the
question.
story?
So,
You want to speak up a bit?
Yeah. So, what does Fortunato want to achieve in this story? He's looking for wine, but he's already drunk. So, if he's already drunk, why is he still? That's my question.
This is a special wine that
Yes.
it's like a rare. It's so rare that he thinks, maybe get in on this deal, this shipment, I guess.
Like more
Yeah, I
wine
mean,
in the future.
he might even get like cut into some deal where he helps the narrator like sell it. Or something.
Yeah.
I mean, is Amontillado really that good?
Well,
I mean,
Come with
You
me.
tell us.
Come with me.
Let's go find out.
Oh, you have tried it?
anybody got it
I'm
deep
not
in
the
the
wine connoisseur.
There are wines. There's a place here close by, Total Wine, where they have a couple of bottles of wine under lock and key,
Oh, yeah.
and they've got values on these bottles. No, I'm not kidding you. $19,000.
I see what we need to raise money for. On a fact-finding mission.
Now, the first thing you know is there isn't a bottle of wine that's going to taste that much different.
It's not that good.
Except if the view is, it really does. If you are a wine connoisseur and you would know, it's, right?
Right.
So you have to think about the vanities involved. There are layers of vanity here.
Yeah.
I mean, not that maybe there is something that's just so wonderful, but that's the issue. And remember how is he dressed? He's dressed like a jester.
Yeah, right. He's
Yeah.
got the
Yeah.
jingling bells on his
The
head.
striped dress, the
Yeah.
cap.
Yeah, well, that's what motley means, right? He's got like these patches, right? So he's dressed like a jester, like Rigoletto. You ever see those pictures of Rigoletto that they have? You know right? That's how he's dressed. So that's when he meets him. So he's out in a carnival. That's why, again, Venice makes the most sense. His head was surmounted by the conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. Now, notice he doesn't claim the narrator is not telling us at the beginning of the story that I plotted for the point at which I would meet him at the carnival. And I knew the carnival was going to happen at such and such time of year. And I thought to myself, perhaps at that time, I will have the opportunity to blah, blah, blah. That's not here.
Right, but clearly he had prepared this guy's execution.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. That is, he had prepared his execution irrespective of the carnival.
Right, whenever the opportunity arose.
But he had also told the servants to leave.
Oh yeah, that's right.
That is, he told them not to leave, and he knew they would leave. That
Right.
doesn't necessarily mean more than I said. It means that he was looking for any opportunity at any time over how we don't know how long to kill this guy.
Well, that's also rather Venetian, because one of the things is that if you're in this square of St. Mark's, and even though there are, I don't know exactly what the population was, but there are thousands of people, and in fact, they're all in the square, but you can generally run into somebody if you're looking for them.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Why does he want to kill him? I was just reading something here, like why does he want to kill Fortunato? Since
Well, he says it right in the first line. He says that Fortunato, the 1,000 injuries of Fortunato, I have borne as best I could. So this is a guy that's injured him thousands of times. And he says, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. So we don't know what the insult was, but we know that it's a motto of his family that you don't insult them. with impunity. You're not going to get away with it.
Dennis, I wanted to know more if there was more to this exchange where, from the line where he says, I broke and reached him a flacon de grave. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. You do not comprehend, he said. Not I, I replied. Then you are not of the Brotherhood. So obviously, I mean, I know there's a pun there about being related to the Freemasons, but obviously this guy, Fortunato, was assuming that they were part of some same club or the same kind of coming from the Masons, right? Like, I don't know if that would necessarily mean anything more than just that.
It is not untrue that virtually everyone who is said to be some major leader of most nations in the world is a member of one or another Freemasonic order. Now, tonight, all over the world, that's not untrue.
Is that a Mason thing?
Well, there are all sorts of things. There's the Sovereign Military Order of St. John of Jerusalem, Knights of Malta, for example, which was made famous by Dashiell Hammett in the 1930s in what was called the Maltese Falcon, but was a secret society that we ran into at the Cathedral of St. John Divine downtown. And we took pictures of their Freemasonic ceremony. And the person that we interviewed, who we thought we were interviewing undercover, I think knew exactly who we were and proceeded to tell us how we were going to be harassed and how we were going to be politically, if not eliminated, certainly crippled by the use of what people call the Anti-Defamation League, which is why we never fell for the idea that the Zionist lobby or the Jews, quote unquote, run the world, because we were talking to someone who made it very clear to us that they were going to deploy this other entity against us. So we knew it wasn't the lead entity. Now, however, that's a way of excusing in your mind how things work. That is, it's true that these agencies exist. It's true that they're extremely powerful. For example, the killing of the banker Roberto Calvi at Blackfriars Bridge in London, who was an Italian. He was a member of the P2 Propaganda Due Masonic Lodge. He was involved with the Vatican and the Vatican Bank, and at one point, because of other matters, he came to light. This is in the 1980s. He tried to go to Switzerland and then get out of Italy, and then go to London. Exactly why he did that is another question, but it didn't work out too well. He was found hanging under the bridge in the morning.
Yeah.
It was a Freemasonic killing.
Jesus.
Just look it up. You can look at the death of Roberto Calvi. It's right there. And this led to an exposure of this thing called Propaganda Due, or P2 for short. And what P2 was a secret society which also ran part of what people call Operation Gladio. Some people have heard about that. It's supposed to be the stay behind part of NATO and so on. And that this would be an organization that would fight against a so-called communist takeover, which at the time, back in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, the Italian Communist Party was a big deal in Italy. A lot of people belonged to it. So when you're reading a story like this, Poe was aware of all of this stuff. He didn't think too much of it. But then again, Poe was probably murdered in Baltimore. And who murdered him is not very clear, but the one thing we can say is that his primary biographer of that period, Rufus Griswold, hated him. And most of the stories that people know about Edgar Poe, called Edgar Allan Poe, are written by his primary biographer who hated him.
Huh.
See, so that should just be understood. Venice was the headquarters for this stuff. London later, but London was created as a financial center by Venice. And so, for example, when you talk about the Da Vinci Code, the Dan Brown book, you know, people get into the nuances of it, but they always forget that the way that it all leads to London. And the reason for that, which is not made entirely explicit in the book, is the Scottish Rite of Freemasons, something that was created in the 14th century. Now, what happens, though, see, is if you bring this stuff up, it gets like it gets like the story, right? Basically, it becomes spooky. And a story that we will read, which will give you a better even deeper insight into this, is the next one, which is Metzengerstein. Sometimes called Metzengerstein, but I think it's Metzengerstein. It's the very first story that Poe published, and you can get any money for it. And we were going to do that tonight, but for other reasons, we decided it was best to go in this direction, just to deepen people's idea about Venice. So this is the spirit of Venice. And that's why I said it was not necessarily set in Venice, but it is the spirit of Venice, the spirit of vendetta, of oligarchical justice, and of impunity through deep planning and conspiracy. In this case, a conspiracy of one. And it doesn't have, the point is, he was never caught because, as he said, it's got to be arranged in such a fashion that there's no trail. After all, the guy's got a wife, right? He's well known. How do you... Some of you know or have heard, and I won't dwell on this, but and I don't really suggest you actually look this up, but there's this character called the Iceman. It's a Polish killer from Jersey.
Richard Kuklinski, I think is his real name.
Right. The first murder, remember the first one? He's 13 years old.
Right.
He's being bullied. And he gets the guy, right? And then he drives, right, after he cuts up the body or whatever, right? And he drives 2 hours south, right? And dumps the body, cleans the car, comes back to school, and nobody knows, right?
Oh my goodness.
Nobody knows.
Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about here, the spirit of Venice.
Yeah. It actually, the character I was thinking of when in similar to the narrator as Iago from Othello, just how much he goes through planning this whole thing of framing Othello. And also, if I remember from the story, it's from the play, it's really petty. I think, the reason why he wants to go after Othello. And then he also changes the reasons to justify it to himself. Like, I think he like thinks that Othello slept with his wife Amelia, I think.
Yeah, he says that at some point. Right.
He says that at some point. But yeah, just in terms of the sociopathy, I think he's a pretty good comparison to this guy in the story.
I'm glad you brought that up, because actually, if people wish to take a look at it, take a look at Giuseppe Verdi's setting of Othello. He did a version of this, and there's a famous aria, but it's an interesting aria, of Iago. I believe in nothing. That's the aria. And Verdi writes this at the end of his life. It's really not exactly an aria, and it's terrifying if you understand, and sort of, especially if you listen to some of his earlier music and you listen to this, you really see what it's like. But that's exactly it. And he, again, Othello, the Moor of Venice. So it is the Venetian method. That is who Iago represents also. Iago is the spirit of Venice.
Right.
And so what he does is he peels Othello apart. He peels him. He sees a flaw, and he simply works on this flaw in the same way, right, that Montfresor does in the case of Fortunato.
Right.
It's his pride. That's what kills him.
Right.
He does kill himself, as was said by Jose. He does, in fact, condemn himself. Because, for example, he could have said, well, yeah, you're right. Look, Lucrece will do a good job on this. What if he had said that? Then there would be no story. So Poe is investigating this, and he wants the same thing that Cooper is doing, which Cooper's doing over a novel. Poe's going to do that in a story. Very short story. Very lean. There's only two characters. There's a narrator. And it happens and it's gone. Like Venice, like Justice in Venice. Something suddenly happens, it's over. And the release of the files, if this happens, on the Kennedy assassination and the other assassinations, are going to call this to mind for people. That's why it's so important to get them, because those are crimes that were committed with impunity, and which still affect the American people. So that's the reason we're looking at this, to get at the spirit of this, so people can understand the spirit of evil, not the fact of evil. See, and on the basis of understanding the spirit of evil, now you can actually fight it and win against it.
Yeah.
I think we'll call it a night, because it's 11 to 8, gives people enough time to, as we should say, there is the.
Yeah.
Want to do that?
Yeah. No, we'll sign off here. I thought the audience participation was pretty good. Thank you for the notes for people who told us the audio stopped working. I thought that this was a funny comment when you were saying that every world leader was connected to some Freemasonic sect. And this guy Hassan says, except for the Iranian supreme leader. I just thought that was funny. Other than that,
there are exceptions. There are exceptions.
Okay, so that is a confirmation that the supreme leader of Iran is not at all connected to any weird sect. You can take that as fact from this stream. All right, everyone. So I guess I'll cut it off here. That's good night, and yeah, we'll see you next time. Right. So here we go.